What happened when the doors closed in the homes of ancient Greek masters? The world outside praised wisdom, philosophy, and democracy, but inside another reality thrived, one few dared to speak of. The same civilization that gave birth to Socrates and Plato also gave rise to a system where freedom was a privilege for some and a fantasy for others. To the world, Greece was the cradle of Western civilization, the land of marble temples, poetic ideals, and civic virtue. But beneath that brilliance, in the flickering light of oil lamps, lay a society built on exploitation. Behind every polished marble column, there were hands that bled to shape it. And behind every noble household, there were women whose names were forgotten, slaves who served, suffered, and submitted in silence. In Athens, Corinth, or Sparta, slavery was not a moral question. It was a fact of life. It was normal. The foundation upon which Greek society proudly stood. Philosophers like Aristotle even defended it, claiming that some people were natural slaves, born to serve the will of others. In his words, it is better for both master and slave that one should rule and the other should be ruled. Those lines were not written in cruelty, they were written in certainty. The Greeks genuinely believed this was how the world worked. And so, the empire of reason and democracy existed alongside an empire of silence and submission. Slavery was everywhere. In the workshops, women spun wool and wove fine linens. In the fields, men and women harvested olives and grapes under the scorching sun. But inside the private chambers, the most hidden corners of the oikos, the household, slavery took on a darker, more intimate form. Female slaves were not only domestic workers, they were often forced companions. Their labor extended beyond the kitchen and the loom. They were part of the master's private life, the part no philosopher discussed and no historian openly recorded. The paradox was almost poetic in its cruelty. This was a culture that revered the goddess of wisdom, Athena, and worshipped Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Yet, it reduced countless living women to objects of convenience, tools of pleasure, and bearers of shame. A Greek household, or oikos, was a small kingdom ruled by the master, the kurios. His authority was absolute. The wife of the house lived under his command, and the slaves even more so. For female slaves, there was no boundary between their labor and their bodies. To refuse was not an option. Consent was a concept that didn't exist for them. The walls of those homes witnessed everything: acts of tenderness, cruelty, and quiet despair, all hidden beneath the respectable veneer of Greek respectability. A wealthy Athenian might attend a symposium, debating the meaning of justice, then return home and command a slave girl to his bed. The next morning, he would walk the streets as a respected citizen, the embodiment of civilization. And what of those women? Most left no trace. No names, no stories, no monuments. History remembers the kings, the generals, and the philosophers, not the slaves who lived in the shadows of their greatness. Yet without them, Greek society could not have functioned. They cooked, cleaned, raised children who were not their own, and endured what could never be spoken aloud. For many, even death was not an escape. Some were buried in unmarked graves, their bodies disposed of like property no longer useful. Others bore children fathered by their masters, only for those children to be denied legitimacy, treated as living reminders of a system that thrived on hypocrisy. Ancient Greek society drew clear lines between citizens, women, foreigners, and slaves, but those lines blurred when doors closed. The public world celebrated order, logic, and virtue. The private world hid domination, fear, and desire. And in those hidden spaces, the ideals of democracy crumbled into dust. The Greeks believed their world was governed by nomos, divine order, the law of nature and custom. But for countless enslaved women, that divine order was nothing but a curse written in flesh and silence. It is this contradiction, the light of civilization shadowed by the darkness of human suffering, that reveals the true complexity of ancient Greece, a society that taught the world to think, yet refused to feel, that exalted liberty while practicing bondage. So, when we speak of Greece, of its art, its gods, its philosophy, we must also speak of its victims. The women who whispered prayers to silent gods while enduring nights that seemed endless. Because history is not just what was built in the open, It is also what was endured behind closed doors. In ancient Greece, the law had no heart, only order. And in that order, some bodies were born to command, while others were born to be commanded. A female slave in the eyes of the law was not a woman. She was not a citizen. She was not even fully human. She was property, a thing that could be bought, sold, or discarded at will. The Greeks had a word for her, doulos for a male, doule for a female. But the word meant more than servant. It meant possession. The same category as a clay pot, a plow, or a pair of sandals. Her worth was measured not by her soul or spirit, but by her utility, her strength, her beauty, her ability to bear children. In the bustling slave markets of Athens, the trade in human bodies was an ordinary sight. Traders shouted out prices, buyers examined slaves like livestock. A young woman with fair skin might be valued higher, considered a hatik. Another with strong arms might fetch a better price for domestic labor. It was commerce in its rawest, coldest form, human flesh reduced to numbers. Athenian law, often celebrated as the foundation of Western justice, was built upon this cruel foundation. Freedom and rights belonged only to citizens, adult, free-born men. Even free women were confined to domestic life, but enslaved women had no identity outside their owner's will. They could not marry, own property, testify in court, or protect themselves from harm. If a master assaulted his female slave, it was not considered a crime. The reasoning was brutally simple. A man could not violate what was already his. There was no such thing as rape of a slave, only use of property. The law viewed her body as an extension of her master's household to be used as he pleased. And if another man violated her, the offense was not against her, but against her owner's property rights. The penalty was compensation paid to the master, not to the woman who suffered. That was the legal world of ancient Greece, a place where a slave's body had value, but her pain did not. The hypocrisy ran deep. The same Athenians who filled the courts debating the meaning of justice, who sculpted marble gods to embody beauty and virtue, were the same men who purchased women like objects of desire. Their philosophers pondered the nature of the soul, yet never questioned whether a slave possessed one. Aristotle, revered as the father of reason, wrote that a slave is a living tool, and the master is the tool's user. In other words, the slave existed solely for the convenience of her owner. She was an instrument of his comfort and pleasure, not a person with will or thought of her own. This idea wasn't fringe. It was the foundation of Greek law and morality. And yet, the contradiction was glaring. These same men celebrated the goddess of love, Aphrodite, and spoke of purity, fidelity, and virtue. They held women to impossible standards, chastity for wives, obedience for slaves, while their own desires were excused as natural. In Athens, beauty could become a curse for an enslaved woman. Those who were young and attractive were often purchased not for labor, but for the bedroom. Some became palakai, concubines kept by their masters for sexual use. Others were forced into prostitution in brothels run by the state, their bodies taxed for profit. The city that invented democracy also taxed the exploitation of women's bodies. In the law books, their suffering was invisible. In the marketplaces, it was routine. And in the homes of the elite, it was normalized. Sparta, often romanticized as a warrior state of discipline and equality, was no different, only harsher. There, the enslaved population, known as helots, were state property. While Spartan women enjoyed more freedom than Athenian ones, enslaved women bore the full weight of oppression. They worked the land, cared for Spartan children, and were sometimes used for forced breeding to produce stronger offspring. The Spartan state considered them tools of biology, extensions of its military machine. Imagine the irony, a society that worshipped heroes born of gods, yet bred human beings like animals. Greek comedies and dramas sometimes hinted at these realities in coded ways, a slave girl's lament, a chorus that speaks of servitude, but such words were always veiled in performance, never open rebellion. The voice of the enslaved was not allowed to speak truth, it could only echo pain through the safety of art. And so, the law remained unmoved. Justice in Greece was a mirror. It reflected only those who had the privilege to stand before it. The rest, especially women in chains, existed outside its reflection. When an enslaved woman gave birth, her child belonged not to her but to her master. Her womb was his property too. If the child was strong, it might be raised as another servant. If not, it could be sold or abandoned to die, as was common in Greek society. The mother's grief meant nothing. The law did not recognize her as a mother at all. Even manumission, the act of freeing a slave, offered little mercy. A freed woman remained socially tainted, marked by her past. She could never become a citizen, and her survival often depended on the goodwill of her former owner. In some cases, freed slaves were legally bound to continue serving their old masters in gratitude. Freedom, for them, was often another form of dependence. The Greeks prided themselves on the word eleutheria, freedom. It was the heartbeat of their identity. Yet their freedom existed because others were denied it. Their democracy rested on the shoulders of the enslaved. Their philosophers spoke of justice while sleeping with those who could never say no. Their laws were crafted by the same hands that wrote away the humanity of half their population. To the men of Athens or Sparta, this was not hypocrisy. It was order, the natural hierarchy of the world. To question it was to challenge the gods themselves, and so the system endured, generation after generation, its cruelty disguised as necessity. The legacy of that system still echoes through time, in the stories untold, in the names erased, in the women remembered only as property. Because in the end, the law of ancient Greece did not govern human beings, it governed bodies. And in those bodies, sold, used, and forgotten, lies the truest reflection of Greek civilization's shadowed heart. When night fell over the marble cities of Greece, the light of reason dimmed, and in its place a different order ruled. Inside the home of an Athenian or Spartan master, power no longer wore the robes of politics or philosophy. It wore flesh. The master's bedroom was not merely a private space. It was a stage upon which the true contradictions of Greek civilization were performed: discipline and indulgence, virtue and violation, order and desire. Every act within those walls was bound by unwritten laws, a code of possession that governed not only who could touch whom, but when, how, and why. To the outside world, the Greek household was the symbol of moral balance. The wife, the despoina, was the keeper of honor, guardian of the home's virtue, mother of legitimate heirs. But inside those walls, that balance was sustained through a quiet, brutal hypocrisy. The wife preserved her dignity by pretending not to see. The slave preserved her life by pretending to obey. An enslaved woman's body was both a tool and a territory. Her day began with the duties of the household, cleaning, weaving, preparing food, and ended with the duties of the night. If summoned, she came without question. The master's desire was law, and refusal was unthinkable. There was no need for command. Centuries of custom had already written the script. Greek men, for all their talk of restraint and moderation, often lived by another set of indulgent truths when it came to women. It was acceptable, even expected, for a man to seek pleasure outside his marriage, not with other citizen women, but with slaves, concubines, or prostitutes. The philosopher Demosthenes once declared coldly, "We have courtesans for pleasure, concubines for daily care of the body, and wives to bear us legitimate children." It was a confession and a justification of a double standard that ruled every home. Thus, in the master's chambers, morality bent to male convenience. There were rules, yes, but they served only one purpose: to protect the purity of the wife and the legitimacy of her offspring. The slave's virginity, her consent, her dignity, these held no legal or moral weight. What mattered was the order of inheritance, not the order of justice. In many homes, multiple enslaved women served as concubines or attendants, chosen for beauty or obedience. Some were gifts exchanged between men, tokens of status or gratitude. Others were purchased young, trained in submission, and kept for years. Their value could rise or fall with looks or fertility. And when they grew older or bore too many children, they might be sold, replaced, or reassigned to menial labor, their worth measured by the same cold arithmetic that governed every other commodity. For the wife, silence was survival. A respectable Athenian woman was expected to remain modest, obedient, and confined to the inner quarters of the home. She was the legal mother of the household's heirs, but not necessarily the master's only partner. Many wives were married off as teenagers to men twice their age. entering a world where they quickly learned that jealousy was shameful and confrontation was taboo. The ideal wife did not question her husband's needs. She simply looked away. To maintain order in this hierarchy of intimacy, every aspect of female sexuality, from virginity to childbirth, was controlled. A slave's virginity could be saved for a master's son or a guest of high standing, her body treated as an investment. If she became pregnant, the outcome depended entirely on the master's will. Some were forced to bear the child, especially if the offspring could serve the household. Others were made to abort. The ancient Greeks knew methods for termination, and slaves had no choice in the matter. In rare cases, a slave who bore a master's child might gain a slightly elevated status, but never equality. Her child could never be legitimate, never inherit, never stand beside the master's true heirs. That was the line that could never be crossed, the boundary between flesh that served and flesh that ruled. Yet within these hidden spaces, emotions still flickered, forbidden, dangerous emotions. There were masters who showed affection, even love, for their enslaved women. There were slaves who bore feelings they could never express, torn between survival and longing. But love, when born in chains, was always tragic. The moment it was seen, it was crushed under the weight of custom and class. Greek literature and plays sometimes hinted at this forbidden world. In Euripides' tragedies, one can glimpse the anguish of women caught between servitude and desire, characters who weep for lost honor or pray for freedom, only to be silenced by the end. These were reflections of truths too uncomfortable for polite society to confront directly. But even in their silence, the enslaved women shaped the rhythm of every Greek home. They soothed infants, prepared the marital bed, and satisfied the master's hunger, all while existing in a state of invisible bondage. Their presence was both essential and erased, their suffering both ordinary and unspeakable. The contradiction was staggering. This was a culture that wrote hymns to Eros, the god of love, yet stripped love of all meaning when it came from a woman without freedom. A society that celebrated Aphrodite's beauty while buying and selling real women in her name. In the grand narrative of Greece, passion was philosophy, desire was poetry, but for the enslaved, it was obedience. Their intimacy was never a union, only a transaction written in fear. As dawn broke, the household would awaken to its daily rhythm, the wife resuming her duties as the lady of the house, the slaves returning to their work as if nothing had happened. The night's unspoken acts vanished into daylight, buried beneath rituals of respectability and order. Yet, behind the stone walls and silken curtains, the truth remained. The master's power did not end at the threshold of his chamber. It extended into every breath, every touch, every heartbeat that was not his own. In the end, the master's bedroom was not just a private space. It was a courtroom where dominance was the verdict, and the sentence was life itself. Because in ancient Greece, desire was not love, it was ownership. And every night, countless women learned that lesson in silence. By daylight, the Greek household appeared orderly, the wife presiding over servants, the master overseeing affairs, the slaves quietly working. But beneath that calm surface pulsed a quiet war, a war of glances, whispers, and small cruelties. It was fought not with swords, but with envy and humiliation. The battlefield? The space between mistress and slave. In a world where men held every public right, women, both free and enslaved, were trapped in a smaller arena, the private home. And inside those walls, hierarchy and power became intensely personal. The mistress, Despoina, ruled the domestic realm, yet she too was ruled by her husband. Her authority over slaves was the only power society permitted her to wield. And so, when her pride was wounded, when her husband's affection or desire turned toward another, she struck downward, not upward. The enslaved women became the targets of every unspoken grievance, every humiliation she could not voice aloud. Greek law gave the wife no protection against infidelity. Her husband could sleep with concubines or slave girls without scandal. She, however, was expected to remain chaste, loyal, and silent. Every smile the master gave another woman, every lingering glance at a servant became a knife twisting in the wife's chest. But she could not confront him. To accuse her husband of dishonor would have been a greater shame than his betrayal. Instead, she turned her fury upon the only person she could punish, the slave. Punishment could be swift and merciless. Beatings were common, especially when jealousy festered. The mistress might strike a slave for imagined insolence, for beauty, or simply for existing as a reminder of her own captivity within marriage. Some households branded slaves, a mark of ownership burned into the flesh, often on the forehead or arm. Others used humiliation, forcing a slave to appear unclothed before guests, cutting her hair, or parading her as an example of disobedience. These were not merely acts of cruelty, they were assertions of power. A wife might have no control over her husband's desire, but she could control the woman who embodied it. Ancient writers hinted at this cruel dance between jealousy and domination. In Euripides' Medea, the foreign wife betrayed by her husband lashes out with a vengeance that destroys everything, husband, children, and rivals alike. While Medea herself was not a slave, her fury reflected the desperation of all women denied justice. Other tragedies, like Electra and Hecuba, showed mistresses tormenting servants, their rage simmering beneath the fragile veneer of female virtue. Greek audiences recognized these scenes. They knew that behind every elegant household there was a storm waiting to break. But the mistresses were not monsters by nature, they were products of a system that trapped them too. Their status existed only through their husbands, their honor depended on submission. The only outlet left to them was cruelty toward those even lower. Power trickled downward like a poison stream from gods to men, from men to wives, from wives to slaves. Each rank justified the suffering of the one below. Still, some women took this power further, creating their own kingdoms of fear. In certain households, the wife oversaw the punishment of slaves personally. She could order lashings or confinements in dark storerooms. A slave accused of seducing her master might be mutilated, her beauty corrected to remove temptation. A slave who bore his child could be sold or killed without consequence. The mistress's wrath was both vengeance and warning, know your place. Yet, within this cruelty, a strange dependence existed. Mistresses relied on their slaves for every part of daily life, for comfort, companionship, even emotional release. The same slave a wife beat one evening might be the one who dressed her the next morning, or wiped her tears after her husband's latest affair. The household was an ecosystem of power and vulnerability, bound by routine and resentment. Greek literature captured glimpses of this tension in the murmurs of slave women in tragedies, voices that spoke truth when their mistresses could not. In the Trojan Women, for instance, enslaved queens lament their fall, mirroring the powerless wives of Greece who feared the same fate. The boundary between mistress and slave was thinner than anyone admitted. A single misfortune, a husband's death, a war, a change in fortune, could reverse their places entirely. Among Athenian elites, gossip often centered on bedroom politics. Women whispered of who had lost favor, whose slave had been taken by her husband, which household was consumed by shame. Reputation was everything. To be cuckolded, even symbolically, was humiliation. And though the law did not recognize adultery with a slave as a crime, society did, not for moral reasons, but for appearances. It was not the act that shamed the wife, it was the knowledge of it becoming public. Thus, silence became survival. Again, the wife kept quiet to protect her dignity, the slave kept quiet to protect her life. Both were prisoners of the same system, bound to each other in resentment and dependence. But jealousy had a way of rewriting the rules. In some rare stories, slaves and mistresses formed uneasy alliances, united by shared suffering or hatred for the same man. In others, the hatred ran too deep. The slave was blamed, beaten, and broken, her body carrying the marks of a mistress's invisible wounds. The Greeks called the home oikos, meaning the household. But within that sacred space, harmony was a fragile illusion. The true heart of many homes beat not with love, but with tension. Wives trapped in duty, slaves trapped in servitude, both orbiting a man who held the power to destroy them with a word. In this world of silk veils and stone walls, jealousy was not a passing emotion, it was a weapon. Punishment was not justice. It was power reclaimed in the only way a woman could reclaim it, by inflicting upon another what the world had inflicted upon her. And so, night after night, the war continued, mistress and slave, each reflecting the other's pain, each bound by the same invisible chains. One ruled by the law of the city, the other by the law of ownership. Both ruled, ultimately, by the same man. In ancient Greece, even love was hierarchy, and jealousy, that most human of emotions, became one more instrument of control in a household where every bond, every breath, was defined by power. In the world of ancient Greece, love was meant to follow order, lawful, restrained, confined within the boundaries of class and citizenship. But sometimes the heart refused to obey. Amid the hierarchy of master and slave, where desire was meant to be ownership, something dangerous could bloom: affection. Genuine, human, forbidden affection. It began quietly, a shared glance, a word of kindness, a moment of gentleness unexpected in a life ruled by fear. For a female slave, it was almost unthinkable that the man who owned her body might one day see her soul. And for a master raised to believe that love was a privilege of equals, such a feeling could unravel everything: his authority, his reputation, even his sense of self. Greek society had no place for such emotions. A master could lust after his slave, use her, even father her children, but to love her was to break the invisible spine of order. Love implied equality, and equality between a free man and an enslaved woman was the most subversive idea imaginable. Yet, history and myth whisper of those who dared. In Athens, stories circulated of men who freed their concubines, granting them legal status or marrying them against custom. One such tale spoke of Phryne, a former slave famed for her beauty, who captured the heart of an Athenian citizen and rose from bondage to wealth. Her allure became legend. She was even said to have been the model for the goddess Aphrodite. But her freedom came not through law or mercy, but through desire, a reminder that for women like her, liberty was always at the mercy of love. Others were not so lucky. For every slave who was freed, countless others were punished for the same bond. To love one's master was to walk a knife's edge, one moment favored, the next condemned. A jealous wife, a scandalous rumor, or a whisper of impropriety could turn affection into accusation. Greek playwrights understood this danger well. In Menander's comedies, forbidden love between masters and slaves often appeared as both tragedy and farce, a reflection of society's hypocrisy. The audience could laugh at the chaos, but beneath the laughter lay unease. These stories revealed what everyone knew but never said, that the lines of class and flesh were more fragile than they appeared. In reality, when love crossed those lines, the punishment was rarely poetic. The master might lose social standing, the slave, her life. In a culture obsessed with honor and purity of lineage, to elevate a slave to the status of wife was seen as a defilement of the bloodline. The Athenian courts could even strip a man of citizenship for marrying a freed slave or foreign woman. The message was clear: love was not above the law, yet the heart continued to rebel. Archaeological records from grave inscriptions tell quiet stories, epitaphs dedicated by former masters to freed women they called beloved or faithful companion. These stones, carved in the language of mourning, hint at tenderness that history tried to erase. They are traces of the forbidden, fragments of humanity preserved in marble. But even love, when mixed with ownership, could never be pure. A master's affection did not erase the imbalance of power. The slave's freedom, if granted, was still a gift, not a right. She owed her new life to the very man who once controlled it. In this twisted equation, affection became another kind of bondage, golden perhaps, but bondage nonetheless. Still, for many enslaved women, love, however fragile, was a form of resistance. To inspire genuine feeling in a master was to momentarily invert the hierarchy, to reclaim a fragment of agency in a world that denied it. Her beauty, her wit, her grace, once used to subjugate her, could become her weapon. She could move the man who commanded armies and laws, bend his will with something no decree could control: emotion. And that, in its own quiet way, was rebellion. Even in myth, the Greeks seemed haunted by this possibility. The story of Hypsipyle, the enslaved lover of Jason, or Briseis with Achilles, tales of women caught between conquest and love reflected the same truth. Affection between master and captive blurred the boundaries of power. The conqueror could be conquered by his own heart. But for every story of devotion, there were countless of tragedy. Love, when born in chains, rarely survived freedom. The former slave who became a wife could never escape suspicion. Society's memory was long, and her past clung to her like a brand, invisible but permanent. To the public, she was not a wife, she was a woman who had forgotten her place. In the end, these forbidden bonds revealed something Greece never wanted to admit, that even in a world obsessed with control, the heart remained untamed. That love, though denied legitimacy, could still flourish in the cracks of oppression. The philosophers who wrote of virtue and order believed emotion was weakness. But in these quiet, hidden relationships, emotion became defiance. To love across the lines of class, to see a slave as human, was to challenge the very foundation of Greek civilization. Because for all their wisdom, the Greeks never understood this simple truth: love, real love, cannot exist where one person owns the other. And yet, in stolen moments beneath the same roof, many dared to try. The ruins of ancient Greece still stand, temples gleaming under the sun, statues frozen in perfection, the marble whispering of gods in glory. But if you listen closely, beneath the pride and poetry, another sound lingers. Not the clash of bronze or the chants of philosophers, but softer, fainter, the echoes of women's voices that were never meant to be heard. For centuries, the ancient Greek bedroom remained a private prison, a place where ownership masqueraded as love and silence passed for order. Female slaves lived and died inside those walls, their stories buried under the weight of civilization's finest ideals. Yet, as history fades into myth, one question remains: have we truly escaped that room? Because in many ways, the architecture of power has not changed, only the materials. The same systems that once bought and sold women under the bright Aegean sun now exist in subtler forms, hidden behind modern facades. Human trafficking, coerced labor, domestic servitude, these are not relics of the past. They are the continuation of it. Across the world today, millions of women live in conditions not unlike those of ancient Greece. They clean homes that are not their own, obey masters who pay them little or nothing, and endure violations that remain unspoken. The tools have changed, the contracts, the laws, the currency, but the essence remains chillingly familiar. The same old hierarchy of desire and domination, rebranded as modern necessity. And just as the Greek masters believed their power was natural, society still finds ways to justify the exploitation of women's bodies. Through culture, through silence, through denial. In every industry that commodifies beauty, in every story that glamorizes submission, we hear faint echoes of that ancient logic, that a woman's worth lies in her obedience, her youth, her use to others. Even within homes, the imbalance persists. Domestic abuse, coercive control, the expectation of female endurance, these are the lineal descendants of the old oikos. The walls may be painted new colors, but they still hold the same weight. The same ancient fear that women who speak, who resist, who love freely, threaten the order of the world. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of all is not the cruelty itself, but the silence that surrounds it. The Greeks never recorded the voices of their enslaved women, not because they could not speak, but because no one thought their words mattered. Today, millions of women are still silenced by fear, by shame, by systems designed to erase their pain. History, it seems, keeps repeating its omissions. Yet there is one profound difference. We can listen now. To remember these women, those who lived and died behind the closed doors of ancient Greece, is to reclaim what was stolen from them, their humanity. Their suffering was not inevitable. It was engineered, justified, and sanctified by the same civilization that taught the world to think. Recognizing that contradiction is not just historical reflection, it's moral responsibility. Because the story of the enslaved women of Greece is not just their story, it's a mirror. It reflects how easily progress can coexist with cruelty, how culture can celebrate wisdom while practicing oppression. It forces us to ask whether we have truly learned from the past or simply redefined it to suit ourselves. The ancient Greek bedroom was built of stone and silence. Today, its walls are made of glass and indifference. But the echoes are still there in the stories we ignore, the violence we excuse, the systems we continue to call normal. So, when we look at the ruins of the Parthenon, or quote the words of Aristotle, we must also remember the unnamed women who made that greatness possible, whose suffering was the price of civilization's comfort. Their voices do not rise in marble or bronze, they rise in us, in every question we ask, in every injustice we refuse to turn away from. Because history does not end, it reverberates, and somewhere, in the long corridors of time, the ancient bedroom still exists, its door half open, its silence waiting to be broken. So we must ask, not as historians, but as humans, have we truly left that room behind? Or are we still living inside it, just under a different name?